Yes, people, welcome to the 50th episode of the Backpacking Psychonaut. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to say a massive appreciation for the people that listen to the podcast, for everyone that gives me feedback, and for everyone that's given me like kind words and messages of motivation. It's crazy to think that we average 30 to 50 viewers per episode on all platforms, and to think that not that that's a massive number, but to think that many people give up their time to listen to things that I'm saying, to listen to the messages that I've got to give, and to receive that and be open and willing to implement that in their life is absolutely crazy. And I'm massively appreciative, and just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that listens. It's a huge thing for me, this podcast. It gives me a massive sense of purpose. It's taught me a lot. It's taught me the ability to articulate myself, to be confident in the way I convey messages. And also, it's got me linking up and communicating with some like really interesting people. It seems to be that now I've put myself out there on social media and people have kind of delved into who I am more. People are more willing and receptive to having more open conversations. When I see people around Cornwall, they're more open to discuss their own problems in life with me and have a lot more deeper communication with people. And this all comes through the podcast. So I would just like to say a massive appreciation to people. It's huge that 30 to 50 people per episode listen to this. And yeah, I just want to continue to keep pushing out good content, giving you as good information I can as possible. And yeah, to grow the podcast from here. We're going to level up soon. I'm going to get a better lighting equipment and a new camera. And one thing I'm struggling with at the moment is thinking of getting guests. So I need to do a lot more research into that because, yeah, I want to start leveling up the Backpacking Psychonaut. I want this to grow. I want the Backpacking Psychonaut to grow as I grow as a person, as I grow in my career of being a personal trainer and learning about the mind and the body. I want the Backpacking Psychonaut to go on the same transformation as me. So that requires time and dedication and effort, and that is something that I'm willing to give to this podcast because I want to give you the best information possible to succeed. And also I want to share what I'm doing wrong and what I'm doing right in life. And yeah, and my podcast is the perfect modality of doing this. It's the perfect vehicle to get my expression of vulnerability and honesty and truth towards a path of self-improvement to you. And yeah, I hope you get loads of value from it. So in this episode, I want to just discuss some things I've learned from the podcast for starters. I think it's really interesting, the lessons I've learned from 50 episodes. It's been a huge transition of confidence and communication skills and developing an understanding and an articulation of my own ideas and thoughts. I also want to discuss my plans for the podcast, where I think this podcast is going to go, what I want from the podcast, and also just discuss some of my life plans and some of the things that are going on in the complex mind of Alex Rogers. So yeah, let's get into it. I think we should start actually with the lessons I've learned from the podcast. And I'm just going to rattle some off my brain. I've not got any notes for this podcast. This is kind of just all off the top of my head. So the first lesson I've learned from the podcast is hard work and dedication and consistency are key to any endeavor, to any goal you want to achieve, to any desire that you want to accomplish. You must have consistency and hard work at the base of that. You can't get anything without it. Unfortunately, we live in a world where if you don't do these things, if you're not consistent, if you're not working hard, someone else will take your place. And to develop skills, to get good at anything, to overcome the barriers of fear, to overcome the barriers of self-doubt, you need to work hard. You need to do actions. You must lead with action, because without leading with action, you get stuck in your head and you live in a state of inaction. And inaction is a form of action. Regardless of what you're doing, you're taking action. So you might as well take action towards overcoming your fears, to accomplishing that goal, to pushing past the barriers of anxiety and fear, to going to the gym, to posting that podcast, to posting the social media content, to applying to a new job. You must lead with action. And this has been the most blatantly obvious lesson that I've learned from the podcast. And I can see it in the viewers, right? When I am consistent and I post every week, Saturday, without fail, the viewers start to grow. The podcast starts to grow. When I stop and miss a week, I lose viewers, because consistency is everything. The compound effect needs action to grow and compound and start the ball rolling. So consistency is everything, and it's something I've lacked the last month. due to me getting very stuck in my head and living in a state of inaction. I've been choosing inaction instead of leading with action. I get stuck in my mind that, like, I'm not going to post a good podcast. What do I talk about? I can't get enough guests. But all I need to do is sit down and do the work. And that's with anything. Stop thinking about getting in shape. Stop thinking about doing this. Stop thinking about approaching the girl. Just go and do these things. Lead with action and watch your life unfold. Because the more you lead with action, the greater the results compound. So that's the best lesson I've learned from the podcast. And it's a lesson that I'm really going to implement in my own mind to sharpen my tool of discipline and to do the hard work, especially when I don't feel like it. The next lesson I've learned is the limits of our language define the limits of our world. Your ability to articulate yourself, your ability to convey the ideas in your mind in a cohesive manner to someone else's brain for them to comprehend is one of your greatest assets. The greater you can articulate yourself, the more greater vocabulary you have at your arsenal, the easier you're going to have to connect with people, the easier time you're going to have communicating your ideas, the easier time you're going to have manifesting them ideas and actions, because you're going to understand things more thoroughly. And your ability to articulate yourself comes from numerous ways, but the best way that I found is sitting down and doing this podcast. I read a lot, I write a lot, which are massive beneficiaries for learning to articulate myself and understanding the concepts that are in my mind in a cohesive manner. But the greatest one is sitting down and doing this podcast, because when you sit down and talk about things, when you sit down and you're forced to have a continuous flow of conscious splurging for 40 minutes to an hour, it shows your inadequacies. It shows where you can't articulate yourself properly. It shows when you don't thoroughly understand something, because to understand something is to teach something. As soon as you can teach a concept and you can describe it in a manner that people can comprehend and apply in their own life, that shows you actually understand that topic. And this is a big motivation for me doing the podcast, is to be able to teach people, because through that I'm learning on a different level. I'm starting to comprehend things in ways that are outside my own framework of thinking, my own experience. I've got to explain it to someone that maybe hasn't had the same experience to me, can't relate to my exact experiences. So I've got to communicate in it in different ways. I've got to explain it in different ways. And that all develops my understanding. And this is the greatest thing that I've learned from the podcast, is your ability to articulate yourself not only makes you look more confident, not only makes you more cohesive, not only makes you more respectable, but it gives you a deeper understanding of your own thoughts. It gives you more confidence in the fact that you can convey messages to people, and it improves your communication. So yeah, the limits of your language define the limits of your world. So what I recommend for people for articulation is I've got a whole podcast on articulation, which you can go and watch. I think it was like episode 30 something, 38. But what I'd recommend to people is just getting your phone and setting it on the side and just recording yourself talk on a topic for 20 to 30 minutes. Maybe not even that. It could just be 10 minutes. And what you're going to understand by doing this is that you don't understand topics as much as you should. And you're going to learn to cut out the filler words, cut out the ums and the ahs. You're going to learn to be able to understand topics deeper because you have to talk about them. It's going to make you research things. It's going to make you be more deliberate with what you're saying. And this is all going to transfer into your life, the way you operate in your job, the way you operate in your relationships. So recording a podcast with you or a friend, it doesn't have to go out to the masses. It doesn't have to go out to people, but just doing it for your own state of mind is such an amazing hack for learning to articulate yourself properly. And before I started YouTube, before I started posting content, I did this. I had a channel called Dodge's Daily Discussion, which was just like a little self-improvement channel, and I would pick a topic every day and I would discuss it for 10 minutes without stopping. And this really started gaining confidence in my ability to articulate myself. It showed that I had to do a little bit of research to discuss what I was going to talk about. It showed me that I could be structured in a conversation without having to research things as much. I could just trust my own intuition to flow. And yeah, it was huge for me. And I did this for 30 days, and it was like, so that was 10 minutes a day for 30 days. And that set off the boundary, the base of me being able to articulate myself. And now 6 months later, 10 months later, whatever it was since I last started that channel, I can now record a 50-minute podcast without without any notes. Obviously, the more notes I have, the more structured and better it's going to be. But I'm very confident in my ability to articulate myself, which is something I never used to have. I used to be very anxious about the way I talked, the way I could never communicate ideas. I remember I used to work in B&Q, and like customers would come up to me and I wouldn't know. They would ask me where like a certain stock is, or have you got this in stock? And I wouldn't know, so I'd have to go and ask like a manager or ask another member of staff. And I used to go to the member of staff and I could never like communicate what I needed help with. And they used to just be, oh, I'd come with you. And they would give me like this sense of self-pity. And it used to make me feel so little and like so inadequate, that the fact that I couldn't articulate myself, I couldn't describe what I'm feeling. I had all these like emotions when I was younger that I just couldn't articulate. I couldn't articulate the fact that I was socially anxious, or I didn't have friends, or I didn't fit in, or I was scared to speak to women, or I didn't know what to do in my future. I never had the ability to package that into a way that I could communicate it to others. And when you can do that, when you can communicate with others, you take away the shame. You're not hiding all these things in your own mind, but you need the ability to articulate yourself for that. Because if you can't communicate things effectively, people aren't going to understand you. And to feel understood is to feel safe and to feel held. And we all need that maternal feeling of feeling whole, of feeling accepted without being judged. And you struggle to get that if you can't articulate yourself. And I really do feel for people who struggle to get their words out, because it must be so frustrating. And I know how it feels, but you can improve it. So a lot of reading, a lot of writing. Writing's a very good way to kind of let your thoughts out without being like anxious about how you're talking, without being judged. You can just like cross things out and write them again. And you can be a lot more slow and deliberate. But yeah, do the podcast thing, because I think it helps massively. And that is a tip that I can give to you. Another lesson I've learned from the podcast is that posting yourself out there and being vulnerable and willing to share your own insecurities and anxieties is a massive asset to you, and it can be turned into your own power. I'm very open and vulnerable with the content I post, with the stuff I post on Instagram, with the stuff I post on the podcast and Facebook. And in return, that's helped relate to people and has helped people improve. But it's also let go of the idea that these insecurities are sitting in my mind. These things I'm afraid of are things that I should be ashamed of. And when you have shame, it's the lowest vibrational frequency of an emotion. And when you have shame, you kind of box yourself in this little category of, I can't talk about that. I can't let go of it. And it becomes part of your identity because you're holding on to it. But when you're willing to let things go and communicate things with people and share your insecurities, share your anxieties, what it does is it opens up the idea to that thing's not you. It's something that you're experiencing. And then you can let it go out into the ether. You can let it go out into the willingness to be judged by others. And by that, you're letting go of the importance of it, because really the most things we're scared of are the fear of death and the fear of judgment, the fear of being judged by others. And if you can let go of that fear of judgment and share your anxieties, share the facts that you're socially anxious, or share the facts that you're scared to speak to women sometimes, you've just let go a massive part of your identity. You put it out there to be judged by people, and it shows that you're vulnerable and you don't care what other people think. And obviously, like, sharing it, you get so anxious sometimes. Sometimes I do think when I'm in conversations with people, I'm like, oh, they know I've suffered with social anxiety. Do you think they think I'm being socially anxious? But the idea of me just communicating these things effectively is slowly chipping away at the fact that that concrete idea of me being socially anxious is just an illusion. And the more I share it, the more I'm willing to be open about it and improve, the more I'm just chipping away at it and the less power it has over me. So yeah, the podcast has been like a massive modality for me to share with others how I'm feeling. I don't think there's any other lessons, to be honest. I think the other lesson is just like continuous improvement. As I said before, it's just not expecting too much from yourself, but having high standards, but being willing to accept the fact that like things take time and they take progress to improve, and you're not always going to be consistent. You're not always going to have the best podcast. You're not always going to have the best workout. You're not always going to be on your best form. But the idea of just letting that happen and realizing that how much you've improved in the past, like look at yourself 6 months ago and see how much you've improved. See how much you're still alive. You're still doing things. nothing's killed you. You push past insecurities and anxieties. You're doing all these things, and take confidence from that. Take confidence from the fact that like you're improving as a human. You are getting better slowly but surely, and that's going to compound and keep compounding. You're going to build up more wisdom, more knowledge, and you're going to gain more power over the insecurities and anxieties. So they're all the lessons I've learned from the podcast. I've learned tons more, but yeah, they're like the main ones that stick out. What else was I going to discuss? Plans for the backpacking Psychonaut. This is a tough one. I've been very insecure about the podcast recently. It's not been at the top of my mind because I've been very focused on other things. I'm so clouded by what I want to do in the future that it's very hard to like focus on one thing and give it my full attention. If you're anything like me, I've got this idealistic version of myself that I want to achieve. I've got this idea of being this version of Alex who's confident, who's got loads of integrity, who does everything he needs to do, who's rich, who has loads of resources, who has an abundant date in life. And I think sometimes because I have this idea of who I want to be, it clouds who I am. And I get very discouraged by the actions I'm taking. When I see the podcast isn't growing as much, when I see the fact that my physique hasn't come on as much as it should do, it sometimes discourages me and makes me kind of like stop things. And this podcast has been similar because like the growth is going to be slow like anything. I think I've kind of got this second doubt about this podcast being a thing that I should be doing. But I know when I sit down and record the podcast, I know that when I sit down and share what I'm feeling, it makes me feel amazing and it helps other people evidently from the messages I get and the feedback I get from the viewers. So for the backpacking Psychonaut, I'm necessarily not looking for loads of viewers or necessarily not looking for the biggest podcast in the world. I just want it to be a vehicle of inspiration for people, a vehicle of comfort for people who are struggling, who they can see that I'm someone who struggles myself and I'm sharing it out to the internet, so it's not just you that's struggling. And I want to build like a little community of people where we can all hold each other accountable, where we can all improve together, where you can have someone who understands you, because like we're all human at the end of the day. We all experience this consciousness that is the human existence, and we all have our own insecurities and anxieties in different frameworks, but it's still insecurities and anxieties. Just because your scenario is different to mine, we still experience the same emotions. We still experience the same thing of going to work, hating your job, having anxiety around women, not being confident in the way you look. And we can all get through this together. And I just want this podcast to be that. I want it to be a vehicle of inspiration and comfort for people. And also a way to explore my intellectual curiosity. I think a big thing for me is like mastering things. I want to be good at something. I want to be able to understand things properly. And my sense of value doesn't come from, I don't think it will come from the money that I make. I don't think it will come from being a high value man or whatever it is. I think my sense of value comes from knowing that I'm getting good at things and knowing that I'm mastering things, because that sense of mastery, that sense of self-actualization gives you so much purpose and so much drive. And I love it when I'm like researching a subject and it finally clicks that I understand that, and then I apply it to a different scenario in my life and then I see how it can help other people. That's like a light bulb. That light bulb switch that goes off in my head when I discover new things is what I live for. It's fulfilling my intellectual curiosity. And I want the backpacking Psychonaut to be the vehicle which I can explore my intellectual curiosity. And this is what the education system does wrong. The education system tries to like make learning very structured. Like you sit down, read this, stay in the frameworks of our thinking, and it takes the fun out of learning. It takes the aha moment. It takes the excitement out of going out and researching something new. And when you follow your intellectual curiosity, when there's something you're actually passionate about and curious about, you can sit there and read it for hours. I can read books on philosophy for hours. I can read books on the mind, the body for hours. But put me in school in their way of teaching and get me to do that when I was younger, I just wouldn't have done it. I didn't enjoy it. So we need to deprogram this idea that learning is boring, because learning is the most satisfying thing you can do. Growing as an individual and applying that knowledge and turning that into wisdom is the greatest thing that you can do. So yeah, that's what I want the podcast to be. I want the podcast to be my vehicle for intellectual curiosity, a hub for people to find comfort and inspiration and new information and get help with their problems. And yeah, that's where I see for the podcast. My current life plans are to move to Manchester. So I'm moving to Manchester at the end of the year. Not that I generally want to live in the UK. I think going travelling and then going on holiday recently, it's really shown me the fact that there is greater locations in the UK. The UK is miserable in terms of weather. It's a very mundane life. I feel like the main culture of the UK, the main message is to live for the weekend. It's to work a job you don't hate and then go out and get smashed on the weekend. And because it's so miserable weather all the time, people seem to be very like a bit more depressed and secluded. When you go to the countries that are nicer weather, where you go to the more Mediterranean climates, everyone's more open to doing things. I went on holiday the other day and like people just, I had a game of volleyball with people, like loads of like Danish people I didn't know and Swedish people. And you can't do that in the UK. It just doesn't happen. So I think when you're out in the sun, you're out living a more chilled lifestyle, the culture's different. And I love the UK. I've been very blessed to be brought up in a society where I had the freedom to record a podcast, have a freedom to have a phone, have a freedom to have access to the internet and have all this opportunity. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for more. And I'm going to go to Manchester to be a personal trainer just to get some experience training clients and experience actually changing people's lives in a person-to-person scenario. But I think after 6 months to a year of Manchester, I'm going to shoot off to Australia or shoot off to a different climate and go and live my life in a manner that I find purposeful. I only get one chance to live life. I only get one conscious experience. And I'm not going to let that get defined by other people. I'm not going to let that get ruined by other people. It's my responsibility to take my actions into account and start cultivating a life that I want. And that's what I'm going to do. So my plans are to move to a different country eventually, to keep continuing the podcast, to master the art of transforming people's lives, transforming my own life, and just to continuously improve, just to keep being me, keep being vulnerable, keep helping others, lead with compassion, lead with action, and just see where life takes me. Because it's an interesting one. I never thought I'd be here right now doing what I'm doing. I know obviously I'm still working at Marks and Spencer's, so it's not like I'm a massive entrepreneur or whatever, but to see the progress that I've made in the last 3 years, it's inspiring for me. It shows that I'm capable of achieving things. It shows that I have got it in me to achieve something in my life, to achieve my goals, to cultivate a life that I want. And that all comes from evidence. It comes from taking action, seeing the improvements in my life, and everyone can get that. I'm not special. The people who are hiring me aren't special. All they are is people that have took action, got a clear vision, got a clear goal, and headed towards that and aimed towards it. So, yeah, that's everything I wanted to discuss in today's podcast. Yeah, I get a lot of insecurities and anxieties around the things I do, and this podcast, being able to share my insecurities and anxieties with other people really does help. So I really appreciate everyone that listens and everyone that gives me the feedback. I'm just massively grateful for it all. So yeah, people, this is just the start. Let's grow the Backpacking Psychonaut to where I want it to be. Let's start cultivating a community. Episodes are going to be dropping every Saturday. That's my promise to the viewers now. I'm not going to break that. I started off very consistent with it, but the last couple months have been a bit inconsistent because I've been trying new things and I've been stuck in my head about my future. But my fault. We're going to do every Saturday is going to be an episode. That's my promise. And I just want to give you the best content possible. So, people, thank you very much for listening to 50 episodes. Hey, I'll see you at 100. I'll see you at 1,000. I'll see you at 1,000,000, whatever we get to. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening, people. And I'll see you all in the next episode.